Hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday Night Conversations. Glad you are here. And I'm Steve Holder. I'm your host, and my co host is Smiley Story again, of course. And we have a special guest tonight, and we'll bring him on shortly. Well, actually, he's there right now, isn't he? Okay. Uh, See, I don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, Michael is a great guy. He's been done a lot of things. He's done consulting with law enforcement. He's an ex-mafia guy, and he's an author and all kinds of stuff. So he'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But first of all, thank everybody for being here, and thanks for mods for showing up. I appreciate that. Hope everybody's had a good week, good day. It's been nice and warm in East Tennessee, probably where you are also. Uh, but anyway, Smiley, do you want to say anything before I let Mike take off?
I was just going to say we were talking backstage, and I've been reading his book, and he just informed me that this is not. I told him to fit it in here because it's not a complete book. So he has a very interesting, colorful life. And as we're talking, I think y'all are going to really enjoy this show. So, mods, please share out this live. And thank you very much, all of you, for being here.
Absolutely. So, Mike, go ahead. I'll give you the mic, and you say what you want to say, and we'll have questions later. So just take your time and tell your story.
Well, thank you, Steve and Smiley, for having me tonight. It was a pleasure talking to you backstage. And I just want to get that ex-mob guy out of the story. I was never a mobster, but I lived with him. Let me tell you the story where it started. Three very, very special things happened to me in 1957. The first was I was born in 1957. Life began. The second very, very big thing that happened the year I was born was the Appalachian Mafia Convention raid. It was the first time in United States history that the government had to admit the mafia was a real thing. It was no longer a rumor or a myth or an old wives' tale. That meeting in Appalachian, New York, which was about 5 miles away from the community I lived in, was the meeting in the Godfather movie where the 5 families were divvying up their territories and discussing for the first time whether or not they were going to officially get into drugs. So that whole scene in the Godfather movie was based on what happened in Appalachian in 1957. The reason they had it in Appalachian was Joe Barbara, a mobster, was sick and dying. The meeting was always held in Chicago. But that year, they allowed Joe Barbara to host it because he couldn't travel. So all these mobsters from all over, and including Sicily and parts of Italy, showed up at that meeting. It was at an old farmhouse in the middle of the country. And, the police got a little curious when 50, 60 cars from out of state showed up in Appalachian, New York, which had a population probably of only a couple thousand people. So the third thing that was significant in 1957 was my father became self-employed. He started a pest control business. He was an exterminator, and he went into his own business. So those 3 things happened in 1957. I was born, my father started a business, and the biggest raid in U.S. history happened in Appalachian, New York, just a stone throw away from where I was raised. So my father, when he started his business, the mobsters came to him and said, Sam, you're going to be in people's houses and businesses. You're going to tell us where the jewelry is, where the money is, where the guns are, and you're going to leave the back door open, and we're going to make you a wealthy man. And my father, right there on the spot, said, kill me right now if that's what you do, because that will never happen. I will never disgrace my family name. So they had a big meeting about my father's refusal to cooperate with them. And it was Joe Barbara and Russell Bufalino and some of the older mobsters that said, wait a minute, you leave your hands off of Sam. You don't touch him. When I have bugs, and Joe Barbara owned Canada Dry Soda Company, which was pretty big in the Northeast. He said, listen, when I need an exterminator, I want to make sure he's not going through my dresser drawers and my closets and leaving the back door open for the highest bidder. And when I introduce people to an exterminator, I want to make sure my exterminator is not robbing them and making me look bad. So for 25 years, my father had a good, legitimate business, never did anything crooked, but he knew them. Our community was the home of IBM, where IBM originated. 60,000 employees. EJ Shoe Company was there, 95% Italian immigrants, 40,000 of them. So when we lived in Endicott, New York, which was 95% Italian, good, hardworking taxpayers, and mobsters, they were just part of the scenery and part of life. So growing up, I worked with my father on school vacations, holidays, summer vacations, and I exterminated their homes and their businesses. And I knew them to say, hi, how are you? I'm here to exterminate. Hi, how are you? I'm here to collect the bill. And that was my relationship. And they owned everything or had their hands into everything. There were no supermarkets back then. There were grocery stores on every corner. And they controlled everything. They had the bistros and the delis and the soda factories and the car lots and they just had their hands in everything. So growing up, I knew about them. I heard the back room talk, but I was never involved with them. So let's fast forward 25 years. My father decides he wants to sell the business. And he's got a guy working with him for several years that's really qualified to take over. And I really didn't want to have anything to do with the New York State DEC, pesticides, and bugs. So I took off and traveled. I went to Florida. I went to Arizona. I was in California at the time. My father sold his business. The mob lawyers influenced the sale. Surprise to everybody, the guy that was working with my father and buying the business owed the mob a lot of money for gambling. So they said, you get Sam to sell you the business. We'll take care of all the paperwork. Your debts will be forgiven. And now we own his beautiful cash-rich business. So my father walked away from that closing. All the paperwork was changed so arrogantly that you could tell the paper wasn't from the same binder. And the type on the typewriter that changed the conditions next to his signatures wasn't even the same type. So my father walked away, almost $1 million transaction without a penny, with no recourse, nothing. He went to the bar association. They said, "Oh, those are mob lawyers. Sorry." And he went to law enforcement, and they said, you know what? We're not interested. So in 1982, when this happened, John Gotti was in the news, the Teflon Don. And my father actually secured an appointment with 60 Minutes to talk about what happened to him and how he couldn't get any help. Well, that got out. So the mob lawyer called my father and said, Sam, come on down to Endicott. We got to talk. Things are getting out of hand. Well, the minute he left the house, they must have had a spotter, because the minute he left the house, the phone rang again. Now, we didn't have cell phones in 1982. We had cassette recorders. One cassette gave the message and the other cassette recorded the message. Yeah. So my mother answered the phone, and the mob lawyer said to my mother, Marie, if your husband thinks he's going on 60 Minutes, we're going to kill you and your kids, meaning me and my sister. And my mother was kind of spry, and she knew the lawyer. So she said, wait a minute now, because my husband's stubborn, bullheaded guinea, you're going to kill me and my kids? And he said, Marie, that's how it works. That's what's going to happen. And we're going to let him live to regret that he got you guys killed. So she hung up, and lo and behold, the answer machine beeped. She had accidentally, unknowingly recorded the whole thing.
Oh, crap.
So she called me in California, and she said, Michael, you have to come home. If your father hears this, he'll do something really stupid and get us all killed. He'll blow his lid. So I came home, and I took the cassette tape to the Binghamton FBI. The FBI agent met me on the front stairs of the federal building, and he said, Bonventre, take that tape and burn it, destroy it. We know all about them robbing your father for $1 million, and we know all about them threatening to kill you. And if your father doesn't shut up and lick his wounds and get on with his life, they're going to kill you, and we don't care. I'm 25. I'm looking at an FBI agent. And I said, what do you mean you don't care? And he explained to me in great detail about his 25-year investigation. They started investigating them in 1957, and they made tons of money on budgets. They made tons of money on investigations and leading to bigger things. And he said, this is where he got me. He said, you and your family, your business, and your lives are acceptable collateral damage to the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And, like any 25-year-old with no experience, I walked away kind of defeated with my head down, and he called me back. And he said, Mike, I want to make sure you understand this. This is a gravy job for me. My wife has a career here. My kids are settled in here. Not only does your government not care about you, I personally will prevent you from doing anything that's going to interfere with our 25-year investigation. So I looked him in the eye and I said, my grandmother used to say, when you have something to say it and shut up, because if you keep talking, you're going to say something wrong. I said, you, my friend, talked too much, and now you've made this personal. I don't know what I'm going to do, but you will be fired, and you will be working in some third world country with your wife and your kids before anybody kills me. And I got in the car, kind of looked in the rearview mirror, and I said, wow, that was good. You idiot. You just threatened an FBI agent. So I went home. I talked to several judges that weren't crooked. I talked to several police officers that weren't crooked. We talked to a couple lawyers that weren't crooked. And I talked to my father and I said, Dad, you brought me up in business. I know business and I know these guys. Trust me. Don't go on 60 Minutes and get us all killed. Just trust me. I've been in California. It's easy for me to convince everybody I hate you. Okay. I'm going to go to Florida where Anthony Gov Guarneri was the underboss at that time. He was the one that took credit for everything, and he was living in Florida. So I got in my car. I drove to Florida 20 some hours. I only knew one person there, but I went into the Hollandale Police Department the next day after getting there, and I said, listen, who's in charge of organized crime? I have a business proposition for you. And he introduced me to a sheriff who took me to the Fort Lauderdale State Attorney's office. I'm sitting in a room with the Miami-Dade FBI, the Broward County Sheriff's Department, South Florida State Police, the Fort Lauderdale State Attorney, and a couple other guys that were there. And I said, listen, guys, I know how your 25-year investigations go, and I know who your acceptable collateral damage is. And I know you don't want anybody messing with your job security and your budgets and your pensions. But there's a new guy in town. And I said, Anthony Gov Guarneri. They dropped their jaws. Their jaws were on the floor. And they said, you know Anthony Gov Guarneri? I said, not only do I know him, I will hand them to you on a silver platter. But the deal is I have to get my father's $1 million first. And they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, all I know is business, and I know greed.
Mhm.
And I know you guys are greedy enough to let me die to save your jobs. And I know they're greedy enough to kill me if I don't have any more money. So we talked. They did a lie detector test. They did, a background check. And 2 days later, they said, okay, you're on the payroll of all of our agencies because they can't take information unless they pay for it.
Mhm.
And I was a reverse undercover informant, which means I was a snitch that volunteered, not a snitch that was saving his life from some crime. So we all agreed, and I said, you got to do me a favor, guys. And they said, well, what's that? And I said, do you have his address? I know he's in Florida, but I don't know where. He was in Stuart, Florida. I drove up to his house, and I knocked on the front door, and he came to the door, and he said, hey, Bugman, what are you doing here? And I said, well, Gov, we've got a problem. He said, we have a problem? I said, yeah, you have a problem, and then I have a problem. I said, well, what's my problem? I said, I'm 25 years old. I'm built like a brick house, and I could throat punch you right now and kill you. But we have a problem. So that's not going to happen. He said, well, what's our problem? I said, did you hear what happened to my father in New York? He says, oh, what a shame. What a shame. I said, well, Gov, the shame is you think he got robbed for $1 million. He goes, that's what I heard. I said, well, Gov, you're just an old fart, out of sight, out of mind. You're in Florida, and your boys robbed my father for $2.5 million, and you didn't get your fair share. And just like we're sitting here today, guys, I can hear him. Honey, get some cookies and coffee. We have company.
Oh, crap.
And he invited me in. And I started my lie about the 2.5 million instead of the 1 million, and how his people in New York were disrespecting him and using his name. And here I am, 25 years old. I'm here because of those idiots that robbed my father and didn't tell you the truth.
Mhm.
What if I was that type of guy that could have just said, hi, you answer the door and they throat punch you and you're dead?
Yeah.
I said, so I'm a businessman, Gov, and you have control of a lot of businesses in New York, and I will take over everything you're in control of, and nobody will rob you again. And I'll get my father's money, and you'll get your 1.5 that you didn't get. And we talked, and I said to myself, I had this gut feeling. I said, something's wrong. I said, Gov, I got to tell you the truth. I got backup. I went to the FBI 2 days ago. And he laughed at me, and he said, no, you didn't. You went 4 days ago. I've been waiting for you. He said, Michael, if we're going to work together, don't lie to me, because I own them in New York and I own them in Florida. He said, but we're going to work together. We're going to make millions of dollars, and we're going to tell the FBI everything they need to know to look good and make more money. So basically, he was a successful criminal because he was giving law enforcement his competition.
Mhm.
Or if he didn't want somebody around, he'd say to law enforcement, arrest him. So they were making big arrests and looking good and getting bigger budgets, but they never touched him.
Mhm.
There was a Supreme Court judge who, in the 50s, New York Times wrote him up as New York's Elliot Ness. He arrested more mobsters than anybody in the history of district attorneys.
Mhm.
Never arrested a single soul from the Bufalino crime family.
Wow.
He was actually working for them, getting rid of all the competition, building his reputation as a great prosecutor.
Right.
Okay.
So it's just business. It's business.
Mhm.
So I went in. Mobsters at that time would go into a small business and demand $20,000.
Mhm.
They'd put the guy out of business. And I said, Gov, you control 100 businesses. Why don't we demand $1,000 from everybody and leave them alone for 2 months so that they can recover and you can get more money?
Mhm.
It's just business. And he brought me around to New York. He brought me around and introduced me to a bunch of upstate New York underbosses like Joe Tadero in Buffalo, and um, I can't even remember their names now. Eddie Chandra, who was Russell Bufalino's brother-in-law, who was part of the Gambino family in New York City. So he introduced me to a bunch of these mobsters, pled my case, and I got permission to do anything I wanted with Gov's people. I could treat them any way I wanted. I could take over anything I wanted. So, but you come into my territory, you'll be dead tomorrow morning. You come into my territory, you'll be dead tomorrow morning. But we're giving you permission for this small scope to get what your father lost, and to get Gov straightened out and get his people in line. So for 3 years, my job was to go into businesses and figure out how to skim money from them without putting them out of business. And I told Gov, I said, you don't need a drug dealer. You just need a nice 40-year-old guy in 1982 now that smokes a joint on the weekend. That's all. Not a hardcore drug dealer, but I can go to him and say, did you buy $5 worth of pot? I'm going to tell your priest and your grandmother and your children and your wife that you're a huge drug dealer and a huge drug addict. And 9 times out of 10, they say, well, what do you want?
Yeah.
Well, I want that $20,000 compressor. Leave the padlock off of it. I got my own pickup truck.
Yeah.
And highway department, we took all their jackhammers and heavy equipment because, they had a one joint a week habit. They weren't drug addicts, but they still respected their family. They went to church. They didn't want to be embarrassed. That was the power. A drug addict, you'd threaten him. He'd say, who cares? I'll get another job.
Mm-hmm.
So we had butchers in about 10 grocery stores. Walk in with $100 worth of cocaine and a little bag of pot, maybe a total investment of $75. And we would walk out of those grocery stores with $1,500 worth of pork chops and chicken and steaks. And they would load us up, and every one of them. And then we would go to the little restaurants and sell everything half the sticker price. It was all wrapped, weighed, and marked for sale. And we'd say, here, you need some steaks? Half the sticker price. You need some fish? Half the sticker price. It didn't matter what the business was. If we could find somebody who smoked a joint, we could embezzle that business. So for 3 years, I was able to orchestrate over $100 million in business assets and oversee their drug operations to the tune of over $100 million. Now, I'll go on for 4 hours, so I'm going to kind of look at the clock. After the 3 years, I'd gotten a lot of money for my father and property that he had for collateral and stuff like that. Gov got well over $1 million. My father got far more than he lost. And at the very end, a guy was hired to kill me. He came busting through my apartment door thinking he was about 300 pounds. I was in good shape. Now I'm 300. But he thought he was going to bust a lock and a padlock and really gave it some oomph. Well, I opened the door at the exact same time he was going to hit it. So we were rolling over each other through my living room into my dining room. And at that time, I was wearing 3 guns. I had a shoulder holster, I had a back belt holster, and I had one on my ankle. Well, when we went flying through my apartment, his gun went sliding across the dining room floor. So we both went after his gun.
Mm-hmm.
He got it. I slapped it out of his hand. And when it hit the floor, it was a revolver. When it hit the floor, it shot me in the shin, and the bullet almost came out of my calf.
Wow.
But the adrenaline was flowing. I didn't even know I was shot. And every South Florida law enforcement agency was in my apartment. And I found out later that they were in the parking lot taking bets. If this guy shoots Mike, we got a good murder. We got a good murder case. If Mike shoots him, we got a good shoot. We build his reputation. And if they kill each other, we got 2 pains in the necks off our backs. So right about then, I was 3 years in. Everybody got a ton of money, and I thought, this isn't fun anymore. I think I'm going to get out of here. So I went back to New York. I restarted my father's business to sell it again legitimately. And I went to every single business that the mafia was extorting, and I introduced myself. And I said to them, this is how you're losing all your profits. This is how your operation is being undermined to the tune of however many dollars. So let me help you get rid of these people that are robbing you, and let me help you hire new people and write your policies and procedures. So I did that out of obligation. And, my moral standards, I just thought I owed those people that much, because basically I became a master criminal in the name of the law. So after I was making the rounds, helping people out of obligation, a local millionaire heard about me, and he said, how much do you charge? And for about 2 years, you've heard of Undercover Boss, the TV show?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 40 years ago, long before Undercover Boss, the TV show, CEOs would hire me as an employee to go in and see what's happening and report back to them. So I was the undercover.
That seems like a fun job, though.
But you can see how there was nothing heroic or brave or smart. It was just, I grew up with those people. I knew those people. It was kind of a natural fit. We worked on their greed. So it just kind of flowed. There was no big Hollywood plot. And then I became a paid consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And that was from 86 to 99. And in 1999, my clients were coming to me. We had 20 drug test providers in our community. So part of my consulting was go get your people drug tested. Well, my clients were calling me saying, we can't pay you anymore for consulting because all 20 facilities are taking bribes, ignoring the temperature. Everybody passes their drug test, so it's kind of futile. So I said to my wife, okay, we're opening up a drug testing business for our clients so that they know they have somebody honest to go to that won't take a bribe, that won't take shortcuts. So we opened up rapid drug test systems. I thought for my clients, well, word spread, we became a national known commodity, but I didn't want employees who might smoke a joint. So what I did is I found business owners and I said, you can service my clients, not your employees, not even your son. And I'll pay you top dollar, but I will train you. I will certify you. You will do it my way, and I will keep close quality control on you. So I had subcontractors all over New York State, Pennsylvania, and some out in New Mexico and different places that handled my national accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's go back to the crime story. I developed a plan that could get rid of being in business. If you own a shoe shop and I tell everybody you're going to get athlete's feet, how long do you think you're going to be in business? If you own a restaurant and I tell everybody you're going to get poisoned in food poisoning, how long do you think your restaurant's going to last? So my goal was to go after drug dealers, gang members, because the police were enabling them for their long-term investigations. So the citizens were calling me saying, Mike, we're complaining, but the drug dealers are just growing. Their customers are destroying our lawns. They're stealing our lawnmowers. They're breaking our fences. They're chasing my daughter. We need to get rid of these guys. And I said, simple, 24 hours to 72 hours, they'll all be gone, and it'll be anonymous, and it probably won't cost us more than $15.
Mhm.
So I didn't go after the drug dealers. I went after their customers. Customers are paranoid. Drug dealers carry guns. They'll fight. Customers don't want to fight, and they don't want to get arrested, and they don't want to be found out. So we send anonymous letters to everybody in the neighborhood not to go outside next Friday because you don't want to get hit by a stray bullet when the raid occurs. And then up and down the street, when everybody was sleeping, we put big signs that said, drug dealers on this street are police informants. Please smile and speak clearly. And then, after 72 hours, the drug dealers are on the front porch going, how come nobody's coming around? And inevitably, the narcotics detective would be seen talking to the drug dealer, saying, hey, if you want your get out of jail free card, if you want your plea bargain, you better start selling drugs. So, okay, they moved to another neighborhood. Now, that was great. I could help you two clean up your neighborhood in 72 hours. But what the three of us just did is we just chased the drug dealers to somebody else's neighborhood and just made somebody else a victim.
Yeah.
Law enforcement hated me with a passion, but in the beginning, they all took me in and went, wow, that's great. We can clean up this community overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 days later, they came back and said, Mike, I can't work with you. I'll get fired. You'll kill our budgets. You'll kill our pensions. And one police chief and one mayor spelled it out to me. They said, listen, we go to Washington, we need $500,000 because we have gangs, we have break-ins, we have rapes, we have all kinds of troubles. We need $500,000. And we get it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you do what you want to do. We're going to go to Washington and say, we need them $500,000. We have no gangs. We have no rapes. We have no vigilantes and break-ins, and we have no thefts. And they'll say, what do you need them $500,000 for? Lay off some people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we can't lay off people. And the other thing that I found a real respect for the criminals. They were very honest. and they had a code. When they said, we're not going to kill you, I know Gov didn't want to kill me, but the other people that I got involved with didn't know about wanted to kill me. So I trusted Gov did not have anything to do with those attempts. But I didn't trust law enforcement. Law enforcement at any moment would have sold me out in a second. Now, let me defend our first responders.
Mm-hmm.
Every police department of, say, 200 cops has one bad egg. But there's this code of silence that 198 of them or 199 of them have to shut up and don't ever go against your own.
Right.
And I've said that in public meetings full of police officers, and I say, so who's the real criminal? I kind of respect the one bad cop that breaks the law right under the noses of 200 that are wearing guns and badges. So who's the real crime? Who's the real criminals here? It's the people who keep their mouths shut and allow this guy to get away with what he's doing. So, and that brings me, and we're going to talk about somebody today. I just had an experience 2 weeks ago. I joined a networking group. I don't usually join those, but this one was special. They insisted that you mingled and networked. They insisted that you bring somebody new to the group. And they had a meeting in a different city every month. And I thought, wow, that's really a good plan. A lot of networking groups just turn out to be little coffee clutches.
Yeah.
So I went to this one the first time. I met some really interesting people. And I drove 50 miles to the second one, but I brought a new business owner with me. And it went beautiful. She got some speaking engagements. She picked up a couple clients. I picked up a client. And I went up to the organizer, the administrator, and I said, listen, you have a really good group and a really good concept. Would you like to do a podcast? I'll give you some free advertising for your group. And she looked me in the eye and said, my husband is the undersheriff. You tried to have the sheriff indicted several times for crimes. You can promote my group. You can come to my group meetings, but do not interact with me. I have no use for you, and I will never do anything with you that might offend the sheriff. Now, the sheriff, today's sheriff, was a narcotics officer back when I took that big neighborhood and undermined his long-term investigation. Him and his partner got demoted and transferred to other departments. He became the tip hotline guy. And there was a jewelry store robbery. 2 armed men robbed the jewelry store and duct taped the young female clerk. And I called the tip hotline, not knowing that he was part of it. And nobody called me back. So one time the message said his name. So I figured, okay, I know him. He's vindictive. He's not going to take any information from me. And I just happened to have the names and phone numbers of the 2 gunmen.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the mayor. I went to the police chief. I went everywhere. They said, call tip hotline. So he didn't answer my calls. And at that time, I had a Saturday morning call-in radio show. I spent the whole half hour calling this deputy out, telling him he's working on my tax dollars. And when I call the tip hotline, he had better answer that phone and he had better take my tips, because I had the names and phone numbers of those gunmen. And just because you have a personal grievance with me, because you're a criminal and I'm not, you can't refuse my information. I did the whole half-hour show on Fred Akshar, Sheriff Fred Akshar. Now, he left the department, became a senator for 2 years. I was happy to see him in Albany. He did nothing. But now he came back, and he's the actual sheriff.
Yeah.
So he's just a vindictive guy. And I know, like this woman, she doesn't know me from Adam, but her husband's the undersheriff. I could have done great things for her organization, but because she doesn't want to offend the sheriff, she'd rather not deal with me personally. Now, she didn't tell me I couldn't go to the meetings, and she couldn't tell me she didn't want me there because it's a non-for-profit, and she would have lost her non-for-profit if she told me I couldn't. She was very polite, very apologetic. I love these guys. I'm not going to associate with you because it'll offend them. And I said, I understand completely, and I just don't go to the meetings because I don't want to go there and make her feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Now, the sheriff, on the other hand, I was at a diner that has 2 rooms, one to the right and one to the left. When I go there, I always go to the one on the right, and I have my table, and everybody knows me. Well, one day I was eating my breakfast, and the sheriff came in with 3 detectives. And they sat down, got their coffee, and then he realized he was facing me. Mm-hmm. And I nodded my head and said, good morning. And one of the waitresses came over and said, hey, Mike, would you mind eating on the other side? We'll take your food over there because the sheriff is uncomfortable with you here. And I said, no, I don't mind at all, but I'm not going to. Tell him to get up and go in the other room if he's embarrassed to look at me or ashamed to be in the same room with me, because I've got nothing to hide. So the 3 waitresses I've known forever. They're nice, they're polite, they're friendly, but they have never touched me in any way. They moved the sheriff and his friends to the other side of the restaurant. They came through the kitchen, and all 3 of them kissed me on the cheek and said, we love you. He is such a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty much how it all evolved. It started that way. It naturally went into a 3-year funnel. I became a consultant for many years because they robbed a lot of people and I made good. And then it became a legitimate consultant. And then the drug testers, 20 of them. In my small community, nobody was doing it right or wanted to do it right, and everybody could pass a drug test.
Yeah.
So I started a drug testing business, became huge. So that's it. And when people have problems now, they call me.
Mm-hmm.
They said, look, we've called the police 10 times. Can you solve the problem? I can do it in 24 hours or 72 hours. 72 hours if the drug dealers are working with the police, and 24 hours if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do want to get this in about advertising. We create our drug problems, and this is how we do it. You read the newspaper, you read a headline tomorrow. Police raided 7 houses, got $100,000 and 2,800 packets of heroin. And you probably think, wow, they did a good job. Good for them. They got 7 drug dealers off the street. They got $100,000 in business off the street. And they got 2,800 packets of heroin off the street. Now think carefully. When your job put out an application request, how many people showed up for that job? 7 or 8 or 10? When IBM lays off 5 people, how many people go to replace them? 15 until they find the right person. Well, what we do is we put on the headlines 7 job openings. You can make $100,000 in one night because that's what they got during the raid. And there are 2,800 customers in this community jonesing for a fix. They didn't get their heroin. So now you've got drug dealers from New York City, Buffalo, Rochester, Pittsburgh, all over the state saying, get to Broome County right now. There's 7 job openings. Mm-hmm. So we just invited 28 new drug dealers to our community.
Makes sense, yeah.
And it's job security. Now we'll investigate them for 3 years. And then they took down 7. We had a big raid here called Golden Roads 1. Those guys were making $100,000 a week. And they arrested 40 or 50 of them, got their money, got their drugs. And then 6 months later, they had Golden Roads 2. They went back and arrested the people they didn't arrest in the first raid.
Mm-hmm.
So they always leave somebody to carry on. I've been undercover. When I worked undercover, I lived with Gov Guarneri. I lived with his henchmen in the apartment next door to me. I didn't go home at night and get out of my uniform and with my loving wife. I was there for 3 years. My own family, I had to convince my mother and father and my daughter and her mother, my aunts and uncles, that I lost my mind and I went rogue and I'm a mobster, because I couldn't afford to have one of them sitting in a diner saying, well, Mike is actually working with law enforcement. So I had to convince everybody for 3 years that I was a legitimate low-life thief.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came home, Thanksgiving was a little uncomfortable the first year.
Yeah.
But eventually the story came out and it made sense. And, my father got his money back and all those people went to jail. I sat down with Gov while he was indicted, while he was going to court on his trial. And we met in a motel with his lawyer, and he said, Mike, he said, I got to tell you something. I really respect you. What you did, you told me the whole time I wasn't going to recruit you. You were pretty honest with me. He said, never look over your shoulder. You took me down fair and square. He said, what killed me was I always had a gang of 3. Me, myself, and I didn't like the other 2. He said, but I brought you into my gang and I trusted you. I trusted not you, but the fact that all those millions of dollars could convert you to really becoming one of us. And he said, I will not serve a single day in a prison lockup. So the trials went on. He played with his heart medicine throughout the trials to get out of going. And he got convicted to 25 years. And he went into the infirmary for 5 days and he died. He never went into the main lockup. He never got his own cell, just like he told me. He played with his heart medicine. And then he said to me, kind of half jokingly, if I get away with this, we may have a different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But he was the type of guy. I always said to him, you make Robin Williams look boring. You're a funny guy. Why don't you just become a comedian? Why do you have to kill people?
Yeah.
You know? And they were very weak. They killed people like any gang mentality. But when I got shot and that guy went into the witness protection program, I went into the garage the next morning on my crutches and I sat down next to Gov and I said, hey, Gov, that was fun last night. What are we going to do for entertainment tomorrow? He was sick. He was on the verge of vomiting. He could not stand blood. And I kept showing him my wound and he was just turning green. And a couple guys that I knew were leg breakers. They were torturing guys. They came to me and said, oh my God, did that hurt? Oh my God, I can't imagine getting shot. And I said, you guys kill people by beating them to death. I know, but getting shot, oh my God, that's got to be horrible.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's wild.
I was a tough guy when I was 25, 28 years old. Now
Yeah.
my wife makes fun of me. I'm sitting in my underwear and my lazy boy, and she just looks at me. Were you like a tough guy back then?
Jeez.
So let me tell you a good funny story. How I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I went back. I started the pest control business, and the lawyer that headed everything up, he didn't go to jail. He didn't get prosecuted. I kind of used him and tortured him a little bit psychologically. So I get a call from his office. Now, I just put all his friends in prison, took millions of dollars from them, and I get a call from his office saying, Joe Fabrizio has a check for you. You go pick it up. And it was a check for a termite job. It was a little inspection checks, like $35, $40. And I said, well, who's Joe Fabrizio? Is this some new gangster in town? And I'm not going to collect the check. Tell him to rip it up. So I got another call. Come get your check. So I said to my employees, I said, listen, I'm going to go punch this guy in the mouth and you bail me out of jail tonight and tomorrow we'll go back to work. So I go over to the office. I go up there and there's this young lady sitting there at the desk. And I said, I want to speak to Joe Fabrizio. And she says, can I help you? And I said, you're not too bright, are you, sweetheart? I said, I want to talk to Joe Fabrizio. And she says, well, I might not be too bright, but I can spell. And she pointed at the door. And I realized right away there was no E on Joe.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That was her.
Oh Lord.
And I kind of still in my mean mode, put my hands on the desk. And I said, do you know who I am? And she said, well, I thought you were somebody I wanted to get to know, but obviously you're just a big jerk. And I said, you don't know who I am? She goes, I don't know. The Queen of England in drag. I can get out of here. So I spent the next, I'm going to say several weeks going to her office every day to apologize and to convince her that I wasn't a jerk. And that's how we met. And my family knew her family. I always say I married my mother-in-law. She came along with the package because my mother-in-law was my best friend. She's the one that said, when are you going to ask my daughter to marry you? And I said, why? Are we dating? She's my lawyer. And she said, the hell she is. And so I said to Joy, I said, are we dating? She goes, not really. I said, well, would it be so bad to try? Because your mother really likes me. And I said, and if we don't make it, I'm going to marry your mother. Your father's got to get out of the picture. So that's how I met my wife thinking that she was Joseph Fabrizio, who needed a good punch in the mouth, and turned out to be a young lady who just graduated law school, knew nothing about nothing. Her father was a lieutenant on the police department, and she just rented an office by chance from the biggest mobster in town.
Oh, wow.
And she had no clue about anything. And so she's been self-employed attorney for 28 years, and just finds me humorous.
Yeah. I told you had a very interesting life. She's very very lucky to have you, and get some laughs out of it and everything else. So
Yeah.
that's great.
I tell everybody I found a good attorney and I married her. She tells everybody I needed so much work it was cheaper to marry me.
That's pretty good.
Somebody asked the question, where do the drugs and money go after the bust?
Well, most of it, and even today, I used to joke that I can make a living. I'll just go to a city, rob a drug dealer, and make a couple $100,000. I won't have to work again for a year or two. But the reality today is the drugs belong to law enforcement. They're confiscated by law enforcement, and they're controlled by law enforcement. Now, yes, drug addicts do get drugs as a result of these long-term investigations. People die at the hands of police protecting long-term investigations. That's why I formed a plan that would go in and undermine their long-term investigations. They couldn't cater to criminals like they did with me for 3 years while your houses are getting destroyed, your kids are getting threatened, your lawnmowers are getting stolen. So that's been my 40-year career, is to undermine drug sales, drug dealers as quickly as possible. My only obstacles are law enforcement. Now, I got to tell you this story. Mike Levine is one of the most highly decorated former DEA agents in the history of the United States. Mike Levine wrote a book called Fight Back. Everybody was telling me I was plagiarizing his Fight Back. So I found him, I emailed him, and I said, who the hell are you? And where's this book, this Fight Back book? It went out of print. And we emailed back and forth, Levine and I, and he was pretty rude. He said, you don't know what you're doing. You're going to get yourself killed. Leave it alone. Don't mention my name. Don't mention my book. So I went out and found 400 used books, and I bought them, and I handed them to all the mayors and police chiefs all over New York, Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio, Tennessee, Johnson City, Tennessee. I was there. Beautiful, beautiful place. All the religious leaders had a community center. They had lost 1,500 young people to drugs that year that they called me. And so anyways, to answer the question, a lot of drugs get on the streets. A lot of drug addicts get their drugs, and a lot of people are dying. Even though they're dying, the police do not want to put an end to their investigation because there's more for them to find out. And the people that are dying during long-term investigations are acceptable collateral damage in the job security and the budgets of law enforcement. Now, I have hundreds and hundreds of law enforcers that tip me off, that give me advice anonymously because they're all afraid they'll be fired. Don't look at me in the grocery store, Mike. I'll handcuff you and arrest you for something. Don't look at me. Don't let anybody know I like you. And that's the majority of our police officers are fine, law-abiding citizens that want to do their job, but the higher-ups won't allow it because they have to control the budgets. They have to control the pension plans. They have to control job security. My father-in-law retired as a lieutenant, one of the most honest people you'll ever meet. He couldn't commit a crime if you wrote him directions. And he said to me, good cops retire at lieutenant or below. You can only be a captain if you're able to play the game, keep your mouth shut, and break the law. You can't. You can only be a captain or a chief if you're willing to shut up and allow crimes to keep getting committed.
A lot of politics.
That's interesting.
All politics, because when I was undercover in Florida, Gov was the only one that knew I had law enforcement connections. I had judges from my hometown call me in Florida and say, Mike, you're not coming into Broome County Airport tonight, are you? Because we just signed a release for the dogs to be there. Why don't you fly into Syracuse? Why don't you fly into there? I had police officers pick me up at the airport with 3 ounces of cocaine and deliver me to my stop. I was waiting at any moment for them to introduce me to my grandfather or my grandmother, because it seemed like every single person had some kind of tie that they benefited from organized crime. My aunt almost killed me. I said, Aunt Jose, you supported the mob pretty good there when you were putting your kids through college. She raised her hand to me. I said, wait. Before you hit me, let me explain. In the 70s, curtains were pleated. And you had to sew sandbags into the bottom to keep them nice and taut. I said, Aunt, you've been sewing cocaine into the bottom of curtains for years to put your kids through college. I never did that. You never did that knowingly. And that was I'm getting some responses here. Oh, okay. I saved myself by talking about the majority of cops being good.
Yeah, because you said you had a cop or some cops watching tonight. Can you tell them that? Maybe they'll behave in the chat. No, I'm just kidding.
No. I don't care, because I'm pretty sure the sheriff and his undersheriff are watching tonight. I got that through,
The grapevine.
through the grapevine, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I wouldn't put it past them, because I've advertised it everywhere, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on all the social media. And like I said, the sheriff and I had differences 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm a businessman. I don't care. I have friends that think he's a really good friend.
Yeah.
I don't care who your friends are. As long as you're good to me, I'll be friends with you, no matter how much I hate your other friends.
That's what I've been trying to tell them. You can't you can't burn your bridges.
No. And if we end up at the same dinner or the same party, I'll be cordial to him. I have social skills, and besides, he has a gun and a badge. So I got to be nice.
That's right. That's right.
Not really. I will say what's on my mind, and I'm safe because the other part of the book didn't come out yet. So I'm pretty sure that every criminal in my area wants to make sure I don't stub my toe, because if I die tomorrow, it's all coming out with the names and the dates and everything. Yeah. So people just can't. The best way to shut up somebody is to ignore them. Don't give them the oxygen. Don't talk about them. Don't acknowledge them. And that's what the media has done with me. That's what the press has done with me. You saw in my book, the press said, can't we find a solution? I went to them with Mike Levine and his book and a solution, and the woman got transferred to writing about children.
Yeah.
And Deborah Lovis is listening tonight from Ohio, from Youngstown, Ohio. She was a grandmother who formed several neighborhood watch programs. I would love to be in a war with her. And she called Mike Levine because she realized that the mayors, the police chiefs, the TV stations, the radio stations all loved her because she had all these neighborhood watch programs. But she realized nothing was getting done. They were feel-good programs. We went every month and had coffee and laughed and talked about what we want to do, but nothing ever got done. So she called Mike Levine. Mike Levine called me, and I called her. And I said, Deborah, the minute you mention my name, Fight Back, and Mike Levine, you will be kicked out of all of your organizations and nobody will speak to you again. And she said, I'll take that chance. And about 4 days later, she was asked to leave every one of her organizations that she started. She was no longer on the board of directors. The TV stations wouldn't talk to her. Only one news guy would, and he was a throwback from the 60s who probably still doesn't remember the 60s. Great guy. I love him. So she called me about 5 weeks later, and she had a small group of citizens that really wanted to know what we were doing. And I said, listen, it's 300 miles. Pay for my gas and I'll come down. I won't charge you anything. She had me on 2 morning TV shows, 2 one-hour radio shows, and she booked the Trumbull Hill College room where we had a couple hundred people show up.
Oh, yeah.
And all the mayors promised to show up. All the police chiefs promised to show up. I did my spiel just like I did. And then at the end, I said, are there any police chiefs here? No hands. At the end, they said, are there any mayors here? No hands. At the end, they said, are there any law enforcers here? No hands. Well, we were being recorded live on TV by the public channel. So I knew I was on television. And I said, well, let's not be too hard on them. Maybe a kid got sick. Maybe somebody got hurt. And all of a sudden, phones were ringing throughout the audience. Oh, the mayor wanted to be here, but, his son was playing baseball and they got out late. And, the commissioner wanted to be here, but and the phones all started ringing. And I said, I asked if there were any police officers in the room and nobody said anything. How about you? Stand up. Because I can see the butt of your gun, and I hope that's a badge. Otherwise, somebody's going to have to shoot you for being here with a firearm. And he was a sheriff. And little by little, there were a couple prosecutors that started asking me questions, and a couple undercover cops that I had to expose. Because believe me, cops are cops are cops, and I can see them a mile away.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing I was told when I was working undercover is don't ask for permission. If you tell us what you want to do and we say no, you better not do it. So tell us what you did. And we can't stop you from what you did.
Yeah.
And that's why we were successful. If I was a law enforcer, I would not have been able to do 80% of what I did.
Yeah. Can you tell me about I want to know how long the secret indictments, the sealed secret indictments, how long are they allowed to hold those before they serve those?
You know what? I don't know about the system, how it works and what the timelines are and stuff like that. I know the street. Ask me questions about the street and ask me questions about people. But as far as law enforcement goes, and I really don't know the inner workings. My wife might know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know if you knew that or not, if you would know that question.
Yeah, I don't know that question. I know that investigations can last for years.
Yeah.
But I don't know the legal workings. I never got interested in that. I got my father's money back. I survived. And I wanted to get on with my life. But like this group always comes up. I feel like Michael Corleone. Just when I thought I was going to get out, they drug me back in.
Who come up with the name Wise Guys? Why are they called Wise Guys?
You usually label yourself something that you're not. None of them were wise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I used to say to the older guys, now what's the plan here? Honestly. Is the goal in life to become 60, 65 years old, get indicted, and die in prison? Is that the goal?
No.
Now, I'll tell you what destroyed the mafia, not me. I brought attention to my community and that mafia family, and they dissolved. And the FBI moved their office out of Binghamton. There's an answering machine there now. But I don't know what to say. There was just nothing wise about anything that happened. It was protected. I always said that the mobsters of the 20s should have been brought out into the public square, had their pants dropped, put over somebody's knee, and spanked like the juvenile delinquents that they were. But they always had a cop on the take. They always had a politician in their pocket. And that's the only reason they became successful. Because I'll tell you what I know where I was going with that. Drugs destroyed the mafia. In the old days, you could murder somebody, get 7 years, and you would serve 4. Your family, your mob family, would take care of your wife and your business and all your assets. But when drugs got involved, now you're getting a 25-year sentence. Nobody's going to take care of your wife and kids and your business assets for 25 years. And when the kids got on drugs, they did everything wrong. They just brought more attention than they needed. Even my investigation that went to court in 1989, I quit. I shut it down in 1986, but it went other places with the Florida law enforcement. And during the trials of 1989 and 90, Gov was on trial, but Tony Moscow was on trial. He was just a big 300-pound slob who was a wannabe wise guy. And he was just very vocal and always in the news. He brought attention to everybody. They hated that about him, but he earned so much money that they let him do it. So I wanted the investigation to go on a couple more years and get, more convictions. But Tony was so flamboyant and so much in the news that they had no choice but to put an end to it before it all got scattered. Yeah. And, he did 15 years. Yeah. And he's not allowed to come near me, but I did get a notice when he got out of prison. And his daughter says, you put my father in prison for 15 years. I said, I never put anybody in prison. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't on a jury. I wasn't a judge. Did you ever think that maybe he went to prison because he broke the law?
Yeah. So tell us about that kiss or kill intuition you developed.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. Did you ever see the movie I See Dead People with that little kid? Every time he looked at somebody, they were dead. Well, I have a similar intuition. When I first went to Florida, we didn't have cell phones. I didn't know too many people in Florida. So when a mobster introduced me to another mobster, while I was saying hello and shaking his hand, I had to decide in that 2 minutes, was he going to cooperate with me? Was he going to con me? Or was he going to kill me? Because I knew I was going to get in a car with this guy.
Yeah.
So it's just something you develop, because if my stomach twitched, I didn't get in the car. If I got the slightest sign, and I learned to read people's eyes and their breathing, and if they get red or if they swallow hard, I got all the signs down. I don't care what you say, you're a criminal and you're not going to be good for me. Yeah. So that was that kiss, kill, cooperate thing that I developed, and we joke about it. And because right now, when I go to a restaurant, my wife is disgusted with me because we go to a restaurant and I'll go, oh, he's on cocaine. He's on crystal. He's beating his wife. I just have that neck, Some people can see that I'm fat and bald. I can see other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If you could take any of it back, Mike, what would you do different?
If I had to think about it before I went into it, I would have told my father he had plenty of money, lick his wounds, and get on with his life, and don't get us all killed. Wow. Because all I did for 3 years was basically I became a better cop than the cops, and I became a better criminal than the criminals. So that was a little bit disturbing. that I was so good at teaching criminals how to be better criminals. But it was leveled out with I was so good I taught law enforcement how not to mess around. So yeah, what would I do different? I wouldn't have done it at all.
Yeah.
There was no thought. It was just a natural progress that just evolved. Nothing special. I was just an idiot who did what I did, and I survived it.
I can describe much of my life exactly that way.
Well, that's the only way you get to be old and wise is if you're young and stupid.
Because you
I
had
definitely went through the young and stupid part.
Well, that was when I was young. I can admit it now.
But you had like 5 assassinations against you, right? That's what you're saying?
Well, that's what I was told afterwards. When I met my wife and we went back to Florida and we had like a little lunch reunion with the state attorney, and he brought an underling with him, and he was telling his underling who I was. And at that lunch, I learned who I was. I didn't know all those things. I didn't know. Well, I knew shortly after somebody had said, there were 5 documented assassination attempts that you survived. Now, don't go letting your head swell. You got a flat tire one night. You showed up at the wrong address the other night. You just didn't get the message the third night. I did go across Alligator Alley with a guy who I knew was going to attempt to kill me, but I paid his rent next door, and I was able to get in and get his gun and put blanks in it. So we went halfway across Alligator Alley, and I said, hey, I got to stop and relieve myself. And he says, yeah, me too. So when I got out of the car, he got out of the car. I drew my gun over the roof, and his gun was pointing at me over the roof. And I said, go ahead, Benny, shoot me. You got blanks in your gun, you idiot. I said, you really think I believed you wanted to go across Alligator Alley for some stupid reason? So I left. Alligator Alley is about 100 miles. I think I left them at the 50-mile point at 3 o'clock in the morning walking. And I said, either the Indians are going to get you or the alligators are going to get you, but you're walking home. And I left him there. And he did show up the next day. Somebody gave him a ride.
Oh, wow. Did you ever, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but did you, and don't feel bad if you can't answer it, because I don't know. What did you ever, in your midst of everything and being a criminal in your criminal days?
Did I miss it?
Did you ever have to? No. Did you ever smuggle drugs or anything like that?
I always played the part of the businessman. I don't do drugs. Why would I do drugs? That's my profits.
Yeah.
So
in the early days, did you have to do that to be undercover or anything like that?
Well, yeah, but I had crooked police officers in New York picking me up at the airport with my drugs.
Was it scary though?
Florida knew what I was doing, and I was always protected.
But was it scary?
Oh yeah, it was definitely scary. That's I was meeting people, and if I didn't have a quarter, I couldn't get to a payphone and call for help.
Yeah.
There were no cell phones. There were no computers. When I went out for the day, I reported back to law enforcement the next morning.
Yeah.
They were so happy to see me the next morning because they didn't know if I survived the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was scary. But I was too young to really digest the seriousness of it. You know how you see something, but you just, when you're 25, you think you're invincible.
Yeah.
And that happens to other people, but that doesn't happen to me. And I had several good friends that got addicted to drugs and committed suicide and overdosed. And there were times I couldn't do anything about it because I would blow everybody's cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say to them privately, you're an idiot. Don't do that. You're going to kill yourself. But it wasn't coming from an authority position, just a friend giving advice that they didn't want. Yeah, it was scary. It was scary. But I have to tell you, the scariest part was at one point, was I doing so well that they were going to take me down with the investigation. There were only two guys I would say I trusted in law enforcement with my life. And I got to know their families. I got to know about their kids. And I really trusted them. And, you know, they would give me the eye, don't go there. And I didn't have to ask questions. I just didn't go. Now, the sheriff, the Broward County sheriff, was just a mean, pushy, obnoxious guy. And he kept threatening me that he was going to end the investigation because I wasn't proving anything. Mm-hmm. So I said, take your polished shoes and white socks off, put a pair of shorts on, look like a real human being, not a cop. And I took him to a bar and I introduced him to Gov Guarneri. Mm-hmm. He spit up his liquor on Gov's shoes. He could not believe I was introducing him to Gov Guarneri. Right. And then Gov says to him, I got a guy in prison I think is going to go the wrong way. Can you get him whacked? This sheriff investigator, I thought he was going to pass out. And so we ended up taking Gov home, which was about an hour drive. And he was obnoxious. He was pulling machine guns out from under the seat. He was trying to, he was really pushing, and Gov was faking like he was asleep. And then finally he got up, and this guy was driving, and he says, Mike, what do you think about this guy? He says, Gov, I treat everybody like they're cops. Let's just assume he's a cop and we'll treat him that way. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then we can't get in trouble. He looked at me like he could kill me. And the next day we had the meeting, and he said, you're a jerk. You're lucky we didn't all get killed last night. You're just an obnoxious jerk. You don't have a clue how this works. And so now we're going to treat you like you're a cop, okay? Because you are, you idiot. And that's going to get you in because they think I'm funny. If I say you're a cop, they're going to think I'm a jokester.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Because why would I introduce you to a cop? What kind of idiot am I?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, man.
Now, I met John Gotti right after he killed Paul Castellano. He was in Florida. Just a walk by Mr. Gotti, Mike Bonventre, and he looked at me and he says, I could have you killed before breakfast is done. And I sipped my coffee and I said, no, you can't. I'm done. And I'll never eat breakfast again. And the whole room went silent. And he chuckled. And everybody chuckled. I got outside and Gov said, if he didn't find that funny, you'd be in the kitchen getting chopped up for tonight's meal.
Wow. Is there anybody that you met or haven't met that you would have liked to have met personally?
I met so many so-called big shots, and none of them impressed me. I just thought they were all idiots. Mm-hmm. I thought Gotti was just a dumb, ignorant person who carried a big bat and wouldn't hesitate to kill you. That was the one person I wanted to meet and really was disappointed by was Geraldo Rivera. He did a TV show called Sons of Scarface. Mm-hmm. After he screwed up, he didn't find Al Capone's safe, and he didn't do this, he didn't do that. So he did this show called Sons of Scarface. I was the guy that worked with his camera crew and said, I'm going to bring the mafia boss out this door. He's going to go to that car. So if you set your cameras up over here, nobody will see you, but you'll get the whole shot of him walking to the car. We open the trunk and you're going to get all the stolen goods, the liquor and everything else. So, and I'm surprised he didn't die during that interview because he asked some of the most insulting, blatant questions. And one gangster said, no wonder they whack idiots like you. And he was just very full of himself and looked down his nose at everybody. He was really rough with the camera crew and the workers, just a low-class person. And I really admired him until I met him.
Yeah. Yeah. That happens sometimes. No wonder he got his nose broke is what I was going to say. Remember that?
With the chair.
Yeah.
No, most of the gangsters that I met, and later, 10 years later, I found out how powerful they were. I just really thought they were like
Right.
village idiots. I didn't see anything smart or classy about them.
Yeah.
Joe Tadero from Buffalo. I took over a bathing suit store on Lauderdale by the Sea, right on the beach. And the guy made me mad. He owed me a little bit of money. So I walked in, I changed all the locks to his store, and I took over the store. And Joe Tadero, I didn't know who he was, but he was the mafia boss in Buffalo, New York. He owned that store. And that guy I kicked out was one of his guys. So he came to Florida, and he was a little guy. Do you remember Top Cat, the cartoon, with the frog that always had the big stogie in his mouth? That was Joe Tadero. He was a short, round little meatball with arms, and he always had this big, huge stogie in his mouth. And he came in and he says, "I'm Joe Tadero, and this is my store." And I said, "Well, Joe, it's my store now, and you and I are partners now, and I'm going to give you much more money than your guy gave you." And he goes, "That sounds good." And then the guy came in, and Joe was explaining that I was taking over his store, and he got a little like he wanted to fight. So I stood up, and Joe says, "Boys, boys, boys, let's not get boisterous in front of me, okay? Calm it down while I'm here." And he was like, not too bright, but he was a gentleman.
Yeah.
And he was a soft-spoken gentleman, and he was a good negotiator. So that's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that was pretty colorful. I mean, hey, I think it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Good. Well, I'm here. If anybody has, I can still tell you how to clean up your neighborhood in 72 hours or less. But you have to stay anonymous, because not now so much, but when I was younger and I was really out there, I don't think a single week went by without some law enforcement officer saying he was going to arrest me for obstruction of justice. And I would hold my wrist out and say, "Do it. I'd love to be on CNN tomorrow telling everybody I got arrested for doing what you refuse to do, which is protecting the citizens who pay your paycheck."
Yeah.
And they go, "Someday."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wish, we could clean up all the drugs and everything off the street, but,
It's too much money. Too much money.
the-
The war on drugs was the best business plan ever devised. It started over 50 years ago, the war on drugs, and there are more drugs today than there were 50 years ago. That was a $1 trillion business. And Mike Levine was in some of the biggest international drug raids known. And Washington kept saying, "Mike, get out of there. Mike, don't blow up all the coca manufacturing plants in Bolivia. Manuel Noriega and Ali North need those. Mike, don't stop the 30 pounds of cocaine going from Mexico into Texas every week, because we're trying to pass NAFTA and we can't afford to offend the Mexicans right now. So let the drugs flow into Texas. We are our drug problem." Now, let me give you a couple statistics that are 10 years old. I'm sure they're worse today. The United States of America, the population makes up 5% of all the living beings on the globe.
Mhm.
We consume 60% of all the illegal, illicit drugs on the globe. Now, prescription drugs. We're 5% of all the humans in the world. We consume 80% of all the prescription drugs made in the United States.
Yeah.
60% of the illegal drugs, 80% of the prescription drugs, and the side effects are killing people daily. And I just had that conversation with my pharmacist. He said, "My God, Mike, you've had 5 doctors." And I said, "I'll have 6 if this guy doesn't listen to me."
Yeah.
You have to be your own advocate. And like I said to my wife is an excellent attorney, and she's well known, and people go to her for advice. And I said, but didn't you go to the same college as those other 5 guys? Didn't you have the same professor as those other 5 guys? Why are they so much losers and you're so positive, you're so successful? She cares about her clients. She cares about her work. When she goes to court with any other attorney, she goes in with 2 helpers and a stack of papers. The other attorneys walk in with a folder. And people settle with my wife because they're too lazy to do the work, and they know she's overprepared.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be passionate about what you're doing and care about what you're doing.
Well, she wanted to be a lawyer when she was 7 years old or 11 years old, and her grandfather really encouraged her. And when she started in 1985 renting that office, no man would hire her. That was a man's world. Women weren't supposed to be attorneys, so she started her own practice.
Yeah.
The heck with you.
Yeah.
And it was in her favor too. We were in Endicott where all the Italians live. She speaks fluent Italian.
Yeah.
Which is kind of tough for me because when she's talking about me, I don't always know what she's saying.
That's funny. That's funny. What's the best advice you have to give anyone that thinks that there's a perfect crime? There's no perfect crime, is there?
There's no perfect crime. Everybody is going to, in Albany, the politicians all wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they get their coffee, and they go out and get their newspaper. And as soon as they see that they're not the headline, they go back to bed. Because everybody's guilty of something. It's just, is this your day to get caught?
Yeah.
It's really tough. What I saw was very disheartening as far as what people crave. Even good, honest, hardworking people want that free ham. Mm-hmm. And they'll stick up for the mobster because, oh my God, that was a lot of my aunts and uncles. Mike, Tony Moscow was a nice guy. Whenever somebody got pregnant, he gave him a free ham. I said, well, yeah, but he robbed your brother-in-law of $1 million so you can get a free ham. Oh, he's a nice guy. I said, he is a nice guy. He's a very nice guy, except for the people he robs.
Right.
Yep. And they were all good fathers. A lot of them were good fathers and good uncles and good grandfathers. And they had the best Christmases because they had all the toys that they stole from me.
Yeah. It's one thing I remember about the Sopranos. They were always good to their family.
Always good to their family and always good to their neighborhood. People told me for many years that I would regret getting rid of the mafia because the mafia pretty much only killed their own, only robbed their own in the early days, and pretty much protected our neighborhoods from the outside gangs. But then once they went down and their kids got into drugs, then all the other gangs came in. Now, let me tell you something about the Italian mafia. They were ruthless murderers, no question. They were scared to death of the Jamaican mafia because the Italians tried not to kill your kids and they tried not to bother your wife. The Jamaicans, when they came here, first thing they would do is kill your dog and make you watch. Then they would kill your kids one at a time and make you watch. Then they would kill your wife and let you live to suffer the guilt that you caused it. That the Italian mindset just could not imagine that. They just couldn't digest that. And they didn't want to mess with the Russians or the Jamaicans or the Cubans because they were just hacking people up with machetes. And the Italian mob was very, very careful not to cross paths and get into their territories. Mm-hmm. So at heart, they were like any other bully. They were cowards. Mm-hmm. Bullies in general are cowards.
All right.
Yeah.
They only pick on people weaker than them. Mm-hmm. So I was known as a kid as the bully's bully. I would pick on the bullies that were picking on the weak kids. I had my 6th grade teacher said, I'll never admit this in public, but Mike, you keep fighting because you're fighting the right people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike, we really appreciate you being here tonight.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate you going way over time with
That's
me.
okay.
Oh, it's fine. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we've enjoyed listening to you. And does anybody in chat have any more questions before we let Mike go? We don't want to keep him all night. But anybody have anything they want to ask?
You know what I noticed when I hand my book out? That's the last time I hear from people. This is the one subject I don't get a lot of questions.
That's like
Yeah.
owing the money, right? That's a good way to get rid of somebody. It's loan them a few dollars.
That's
I
right.
found it. I mean, I found it very interesting. I appreciate you sending it to me, and I printed it out so I could see it because it was bigger, so I didn't have to look at it on the computer and stuff. And
Well, see, I didn't publish it because at the time before the writer's strike, we were actually talking to a movie producer in Los Angeles. Bogdanovich was the guy who made the movie Paper Moon, won an Oscar for it. His daughter, Antonia, is a producer now. And she got a hold of my story. She was really interested in it. But when she introduced me to her production company, I got that kiss kill feeling. And I said to her, I love you. I want you to be my producer. I can't work with those people. Those are the people I tried putting in prison for 40 years.
Mhm.
I said, you're unfortunate. You signed a contract with them. You got taken advantage of. And a lot of wealthy Hollywood people do get conned. And I will not work with that company. But I'll wait for you to get your lawyers together, get out of that contract, because I want you to produce it. And then, of course, we got the writer's strike and everything else. But she really got it. She does movies about corruption in foreign countries, like Bogota and war-torn countries. She goes in and uncovers the corruption behind the politics.
Yeah.
So she was very interested in my story.
They're asking in the audience, will you come back?
In an hour, 2 hours, tomorrow. Not a lot of people like to listen to me talk about this. So yes, I will come back as soon as Steve sends me an email. I'll be here.
Yeah, I would love to have you. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, I enjoy this. I was sitting here thinking, I forgot, I swear before Jesus, I forgot the steakhouse up there in New York. I went to New York, Sparks Steakhouse. Where all the big mob stuff happened?
In New York City.
In New York City.
I'm 200 miles west of New York City.
But
I'm in upstate where there's more cows than people.
Yeah.
So I went to New York a couple of times. I saw those joints and I saw those guys. I was very happy in Florida with the nimwits that I was working with.
But I was going to say, did you ever go to Sparks? You never went to Sparks?
No, I never really went to New York City unless I absolutely had to.
Yeah.
And even now, when Mike Levine and I were doing his radio show, and I had to go to Long Island, I would only go at a certain time on Friday, and I had to leave at a certain time by Sunday. I went when everybody was leaving, and I got out of there when everybody was coming back.
Well, I just wanted you to know, Smiley knows a little something about y'all. I wanted my people to know too. Smiley knows a little something about Sparks, about Sparks Steakhouse and the mob. And Smiley actually went in there, but Smiley didn't eat there. But anyway, Lord,
well, you should have. They treat their customers good.
Yeah, they do.
And they have good food.
Yeah, that's kind of another story for another time. But I was going to say, hey, who knows? Smiley might have to go back there and eat there sometime. Maybe I'll meet you in New York sometime.
Well, I don't know. If you meet me in New York, you better wear a bulletproof vest. No, listen, I feel very comfortable wherever I go. And fortunately for me, most of the people that really hated me are dead. So now I just have to deal with law enforcement. And, today we have cell phones. So anytime a law enforcement person approaches me, I go live video.
Yeah.
You go, whatever you intend to say it, and hope it's right, because right now the world is watching you.
Oh, they hate me too. So, there's that.
Mike, we will let you go, my friend. I don't want to keep you all night, but thank you again for being here, and we definitely
Absolutely.
want you to come back.
All right, and hey, get your questions all lined up, and we'll do something new.
There you go.
I
Absolutely.
experienced a lot throughout the country, not just there. So when the questions come, I probably have something to satisfy somebody.
Yeah. Well, you have a great night and a great weekend. Tell your lovely wife hello.
I
Yes.
will. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to all the listeners, especially the ones smart enough not to ask questions and get your name on the screen.
Okay. All righty.
Thank you, Mike. Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
That was interesting.
That was good, wasn't it? Yes.
Yes. He definitely has not led a boring life.
No, I really enjoyed that. That was great.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. Next week, we have a little bit different show. We're going to be talking to a professional wrestler. So a little bit different, but it'll be interesting. And, it's, who knows what's going to happen. I don't know.
I can tell you what will happen.
Are you a wrestling fan, Smiley?
Yeah, I used to be when I was younger. Actually, we used to go every Friday night.
Mhm.
Yeah. Smiley's full of surprises. Y'all just don't know.
Okay, well, good deal. And thank you again, Smiley, as always. It's good to see you and appreciate your being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
And I will see y'all on the streets.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good
Thank
night.
you again.
All right. Bye-bye.